Well, Sully's on the couch and he's ready to go, and you're here and you're ready, and I'm ready, and there's Scout creating an earthquake for us. Good morning, Scout. Don't walk across there, that'd be fine. So I guess we'll get started. I want to talk to you today about Lizzie Borden. Now, this is one of the great unsolved cases in the United States, in the history of the United States. This one gets an argument every time anybody talks about it. People are still writing books about it. There have been movies. Thank you for that. Keep walking. There have been several movies about it. There have been television shows about it. The house where it happened is actually still exists. Dude, that just looks weird. Stop that. That was Scout's whiskers coming across the camera there, which is strange. The house where this happened is actually still standing and is now a bed and breakfast. So you can actually go and spend the night in the house where this happened. What happened was, keep walking, August the 4th, 1892, Andrew J. Borden was killed with somewhere between 10 and 11, they couldn't exactly tell for sure, blows from a hatchet. His wife, Abby Borden, was killed with somewhere between 19 and 20 blows from a hatchet in a house that had locked doors, had locked doors the whole day that this happened. And the two murders happened about an hour and a half apart. And the only two people in the house were Lizzie Borden and the maid, Bridget Sullivan. The doors were locked. So, who did the murders? That's what we're going to talk about. So let's go back and get a little bit of background history. First of all, there was a really long period of time, oddly enough, where there was this huge run of axe murders in the country at this going on. This one is a little bit early. Most of them seem to be happening in the late 1800s, 1895 to about 1908 or so. I'm sorry, it was a little early. 1912, I think, was about the last of them, where people got killed all over the country by somebody using an axe or a hatchet. And it sounds like, to us, good golly, that's just, bizarre. But when you think about it, most of the houses in the country were still heated by burning wood, by a wood-burning stove. A lot of people, especially in the eastern part of the country, had electric lights, but almost no one had electric heat. So everybody had a wood pile, everybody had an axe outside, and most people had a hatchet inside to cut the wood down into smaller pieces, kindling, to be able to start the fire. So this would have been a very common weapon for everybody to have. Even people that lived in town would have had an axe. So when you think about it that way, axes were probably a lot more common than guns. Still, it's weird to talk about axe murderers. All right, so on December 26th or 25th, depending on which source you read, I've found it both places and I'm not sure which it actually was, December 25th or 26th of 1845, Andrew J. Borden married Sarah Anthony Morse. And then they move into a house on 92nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts. Later on in 1871, Andrew would buy this house and do some conversions to it, and the family lived there. That's the house where the murders will take place in 1892. March the 1st, 1851, Emma Lenore Borden, their first child, was born. On July 19th, 1860, Lizzie Andrew Borden is born. I understand there was a couple of different children that were born in there as well that didn't survive. These are the only two of the children that survived. That was very common, medicine being in the state that it was, and a lot of times babies were born and they didn't survive. Either they didn't survive the birth or they died very shortly of a disease. a lot of times women didn't survive the birth either. So it's not uncommon. In March the 26th of 1863, Sarah Borden, who's Lizzie's and Emma's mother, dies. Emma is about 12 at this point, and Lizzie is about 2. So Lizzie doesn't have any real clear memories of her mother. 2 years old, you don't have any real clear memories. Generally, you might have an impression, but it's not going to be huge, clear memories. Emma, on the other hand, was 12, so she's going to remember her mother very well. Now, Sarah Borden was said to have what they called spells. That didn't mean anything with magic. That meant, for a period of time. So, for instance, she might have a spell where, for a period of time, she became very angry. She became very anxious. There was always the rumor that she had spent time in a mental institution, but I can't find that anywhere really documented. So I think that may have just been a rumor, but she was known to have some mental issues, and which would not have been well understood at the time. And we don't exactly know what caused them, but we know that genetically that can pass down through your bloodline to your offspring. So in June the 6th of 1865, Andrew Borden remarries. His new wife is named Abby Gray, and she's 37 years old. She's a few years younger than Andrew, but not a whole lot. Sometime in 1887, so for a long time, Lizzie Borden had always referred to Abby as her mother, because Abby basically raised her. But in 1887, there was a big fight in the family over money. Now, Andrew Borden was a wealthy man. In today's money, he would have been a multi-millionaire. In that time period, he was a millionaire. So yeah, there was huge amounts of money here. He had started out as an undertaker. He would bury people and, run a funeral parlor and whatnot. He was suspected to actually, this is kind of gross, cut the feet off of the corpses so that he could bury them in shorter caskets and make a bigger profit on the sale of the funeral. I don't know if this is true, but it was a widespread rumor. At this point, he is a property owner. He owns lots of farms. He owns lots of what's called tenement buildings, which would have been like apartment buildings, but not really good class ones, kind of run down. And he rents them to people who can't afford to buy their own houses. He is said to go and collect the rent from these people himself each month, which seems a little bit strange when you figure that he's also the president of a bank. And he's out going around to people's houses, banging on their doors and making them give him their money. At this point in our time, they don't come around and collect the money unless you're behind, usually. You just drop it off at the office. But supposedly, sometime in 1887, Abby had a sister, and her sister got into financial trouble. Her family got into financial trouble, and Abby wanted Andrew to give her some money to give to her family. He didn't want to give her money, so what he did was he deeded a house over to her to give to her sister. Emma and Lizzie were upset about this because they saw this as giving money to outside the family and favoring his wife over them. Now remember, she's these girls' stepmother, and we know from Disney stories, stepmothers don't always go really great. I'm sure there are lots of really great stepmothers out there, and I don't know that Abby was a bad stepmother, but things went badly here. They got so angry about it that at some point, right after that, Andrew actually deeds a house over to Lizzie and Emma that they can rent out and then collect the money on so that they can have some money for themselves. This didn't go great. And at that point, Lizzie stops calling Abby mother. She refers to her after that as Mrs. Borden and never refers to her as mother again. In 1889, Bridget Sullivan, who was an Irish immigrant, it means somebody that came over from Ireland, began working at the Borden home. Now, she wasn't really greatly well treated in this house. The only one who actually called her Bridget was Abby. All of the other members of the family just called her Maggie because they couldn't bother to learn her real name, which seems really tacky to me. I'm sorry, that's just, come on, really? But things go on okay for a while. June 24th of 1891, there was a robbery during the daytime of cash and jewelry at the Borden house. Emma, Lizzie, and Bridget were at home at the time. Abby and Andrew were not in the house. Lizzie had earlier been accused of shoplifting at a local store, is the family's main suspect. And from that day on, all of the doors in the Borden house, inside and out, are kept locked. Now, the Borden house was weird in the first place. You know how in most houses, you'll have kind of a living room and a kitchen that maybe are kind of close together. They don't have a separating hallway between them. But then you go to the bedrooms and there's a hallway that separates all the bedrooms. So like you don't have to walk through one bedroom to get to the next bedroom. You walk down a hallway so that people have privacy in their bedrooms. The Borden house wasn't like that. All of the rooms were squished up next to each other and there were no hallways. So on the second floor of the house, you had the Borden parents' bedroom. I lost my train of thought there for a minute. You came up the front stairs and you went into the Borden parents' bedroom. Then you went through to the next bedroom, which was Emma's. Then you went through to the next bedroom, which was Lizzie's. And from Lizzie's room, there was a connection to another staircase. So from the time when this robbery happened, the doorway between Emma's room and the Borden's bedroom was always kept locked. And the Borden parents used the front staircase and the Borden sisters used the back staircase. They didn't go through each other's rooms anymore, which is weird. It's, you don't walk through people's rooms, but that's the way this house was. Now, on April of 1892, one of the dressmakers that Lizzie was going to was talking to her, and apparently she said that her stepmother, Abby, was a mean old thing. People reported that there were not all kinds of happiness going on in this family. In either May or June of 1892, Andrew used a hatchet to kill the pigeons that Lizzie was raising in the barn because they were flying around and young children were coming and chasing them, according to Andrew, and he was not happy about it, so he killed all of them. Lizzie regarded these as pets, and apparently she was very upset about it. Imagine, go figure, somebody takes a hatchet, kills all your birds. You'd be a little not happy about it too. On August the 2nd of 1892, Abby and Andrew Borden awake in the morning, and both of them are complaining of having a stomach sickness. They're having vomiting and they're not feeling well. Abby went to visit Dr. Bowen, who lived down the street, and suggested she thought she has been poisoned. But Dr. Bowen is kind of skeptical because it turns out that on August the 1st, the day before, they had swordfish for lunch and then reheated it and had it again for supper. They don't have a refrigerator. Nobody has a refrigerator at this point. It's extremely hot. They're having a huge heat wave at this point in Falls River. The newspaper reported that something like 60 people had died of heat stroke the day before. And one of the main things that goes bad the fastest when you're keeping it and reheating it and eating it again is fish. And when he found out that they'd had fish reheated the day before, he kind of went, I think that's probably what it was. I don't think it was poison, but okay. It also turns out, this sounds so gross, that sometime like days before, they had had mutton stew. Mutton is sheep, and it was a stew made with this sheep meat in it. And they had been eating it for breakfast for like 9 days. It's a wonder any of these people lived. I'm sorry. I mean, why that didn't kill you, just the fact that you had mutton stew for breakfast is just gross. Give me a taco any day. But so there's some serious issues with, maybe it's not somebody trying to poison you. Maybe it's just the food you're eating has gone bad and now it's making you sick. However, the next day, August 3rd of 1892, Lizzie reportedly went to a drugstore and tried to buy prussic acid. Now, prussic acid is a deadly poison. She was refused. She was not allowed to buy the acid because you had to have a prescription from a doctor to be able to buy prussic acid, and she didn't have one. She said she needed it to put on her sealskin cape to keep the moths from eating it, which is not generally what you do with prussic acid. Prussic acid is for killing people. And now, interestingly enough, she clearly didn't know that much about poisons because she could have bought all the arsenic that she wanted because that was available to buy over the counter to kill rats. And you can kill people just fine with arsenic, but she apparently didn't know that. And so she tried a couple of times to buy prussic acid, which made people notice it, and was not successful in doing this. So she didn't ever get any poison. Was she going to poison her mother, her stepmother, and her father? We don't know. But we know that the attempt was made. Her uncle, John Morse, came to stay with the Bordens on the same day, August the 3rd. He arrived later in the evening. And Lizzie didn't like him. This was her real mother's brother. And she didn't like him, apparently. And so she left and went to visit a friend down the street, and a lady named Alice Russell, and said she had fears that people were trying to poison the family, that her father had lots of enemies, and, quote, "I'm afraid that someone will do something," unquote, because she said she had seen lots of suspicious characters around the house. August 4th, this is the day. August 4th of 1892, about 7 a.m., Abby, Andrew, and John Morse get up and have breakfast, the same mutton stew still. And Morse and Andrew leave the house about 8:45. Lizzie comes down later and has a light breakfast around 9. And Emma is out of the house. She has gone to visit friends in another city. She is not even in the city when all of this happens. So about 9:30 a.m., Abby goes upstairs to work on cleaning the house, the second floor, and the spare bedroom where John Morse was staying. Bridget Sullivan is outside cleaning the windows for at least the next hour, and she has seen out there. She is seen by neighbors out cleaning the windows. She actually talked to the maid from the house next door over the fence. They stood and talked for a little bit, like people do. So she was known to be outside for at least an hour. Sometime during that time period, Abby is killed in the spare bedroom by someone who hit her 19 times with a hatchet in the back of her head. Now, Abby was not a small woman. She was a little over 5 feet tall, somewhere under 5'2", and she weighed over 200 pounds. She was a big girl. And you think about it, she's probably standing up, cleaning in this room. Somebody comes up behind her and hits her in the back of the head with an axe. She's going to fall. 200 pounds hitting the floor of this house is going to make a noise. But Bridget and Lizzie both report they didn't ever hear anything. Lizzie is in the house, and Bridget is supposed to be cleaning the windows. So she's, right outside there. And years ago, I saw a television show, and I cannot for the life of me remember what the name of this was, and I couldn't find it anywhere, that they went into the house and had somebody that was about the same size as Abby fall and hit the floor. And they had people outside and they had people in the house, and you could hear when that body hit the floor. So there's not any real good explanation for why nobody heard this, because Abby's a big girl. But anyway, she's now dead. At around 11 a.m., pardon me, Andrew comes home, and he can't get in the house because the door is locked, so he has to wait till Bridget lets him in. Lizzie comes downstairs and talks to him for a few minutes and tells him that Abby had gotten a note from a friend and that the friend was sick, and she had gone out to go and visit this friend, and she hasn't come home yet. Andrew goes into the sitting room and lies down on this little couch in there, and somewhere in the next few minutes, somebody comes and kills him, hitting him 10 or 11 times with a hatchet. A few minutes later, Lizzie calls Bridget to the door and says that someone has killed her father and tells her to go for the doctor. Lizzie later tells her neighbor, Adelaide Churchill, that she had been in the barn looking for lead weights because she was planning to go fishing later on. By the afternoon, it doesn't give me an exact time, but sometime in that afternoon, dozens of policemen have trooped in and gone in and out of the Borden's house. The doctors perform their postmortem examination on the bodies on the dining room table, because apparently they didn't take them off and do autopsies like they do now, which just, ew. Lizzie is interrogated by Deputy Marshal Fleet, and she seems to be very detached. She seems to be very removed from the situation. When Fleet calls Abby her mother, Lizzie says, she's not my mother, she's my stepmother. They are struck by the fact that she's completely unemotional about this. But Dr. Bowen, who we talked about a little while ago, he came and before Lizzie talked to the police, he gave her tranquilizers, like sleeping pills, so that she would be calm when she talked to the police. And that would explain all of this detachment. And it might also explain why her story doesn't always stay the same. The next day, on August the 6th, so 2 days later, the Fall River paper starts to criticize the police because they haven't arrested anybody yet. And the funeral service is held for Andrew and Abby there at the Borden home. On August the 7th, Emma, who came home after the murders were reported, sees Lizzie burning a blue corduroy dress in the kitchen fire. Now, let me point out, an axe murder is kind of gruesome. Whoever did this murder should have been covered in blood. We know that. We've watched enough movies. Covered in blood. The police searched the house that day that the murders happened. They found no clothing with blood on it. None. But now Emma sees Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen fire, in the stove. Lizzie says that the dress was covered in paint and it was ruined, and so she might as well burn it. Don't know what was on the dress. Don't know if the dress had blood on it. Don't know. All we know is the police never found a dress that had blood on it. So an inquest was held. That's when they meet to decide if the grand jury is going to indict you. And it was closed to the public. And that was on August, it went on from August the 9th through the 11th, where the prosecutor presents all the evidence that they have, and the grand jury decides, yeah, we're going to do this or we're not. And they decided that they did have enough evidence, and they arrested Lizzie on August the 11th. She entered a plea of not guilty, and she was moved to the jail in Taunton, which is 8 miles north of Fall River, because they didn't have any provisions for a women's prison or jail in Fall River. So they sent her to another town that had a little bit bigger jail, and she was kept there. On August the 22nd, a preliminary hearing is held, and the judge decided that there was probable cause and Lizzie could be tried for murder. So the grand jury meets in November, and Alice Russell testifies about the meeting that she had with Lizzie the night before. There's all the evidence about how there was nobody else in the house. And if there was somebody else in the house, where the heck did they hide for that like hour and a half, almost 2 hours between the time that Abby was killed and Andrew was killed? Where were they in the house? The grand jury issues an indictment against Lizzie for the murder, and the trial began on June the 5th of 1893 at the New Bedford Courthouse. New Bedford is a larger town. This was an all-male jury. Women were not allowed to sit on juries at this point. It had to be people that could vote, so they had to be mostly people that owned property. So they were mostly, it was all old white guys with lots of property, fairly wealthy people. And they found Lizzie Borden not guilty on June the 20th, 1893. She and Lizzie and Emma buy a house slightly, not long after the trial is over. They buy a house up on the fashionable part of the town called Maplecroft, and that's where they live until somewhere about 5 years before they both died. Emma and Lizzie had a fight about something. Nobody knows what. No one ever said. Neither one of these women ever told what the fight was about. But Emma moved out of the house and never spoke to Lizzie again. Don't know why this was. But we do know that on June the 1st, 1927, Lizzie died. She was 67 years old. And 8 days later, Emma died. Both of the women are buried at the family plot in Oak Grove Cemetery in Fall River. Both of the houses involved in this, the Maplecroft house still is standing, and it sold not too long ago for a couple of $1 million, I want to say. The house where the murders occurred, like I said, is a bed and breakfast. So you can go, if you're in Fall River, Massachusetts, and spend the night in the house where Lizzie Borden's parents, father and stepmother, were killed. Lizzie was acquitted. So nobody ever was found guilty of these murders. Now, maybe Lizzie was innocent, but if she's innocent, who committed the murders? And, the townspeople clearly felt that she had committed these murders because there was a nursery rhyme that started being sung around whenever she was around. And it went, Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Now, the numbers aren't right, but we do know somebody killed those two people with an axe, and nobody ever went to prison for it. So what do you think? Do you think Lizzie did this? Do you think she was innocent and was wrongly accused her whole life? Do you think she got away with murder? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. Let me know what you'd like me to talk about later. That's all I have for you today. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time. Okay, Sully, we're done.